This conference will now be recorded.
Hello everyone, this is your host Noopur and I welcome you all to today's webinar on Choose Your Wow with Scott Ambler. Let me just take you through today's agenda. So I'll be first brief you a little about innovation roots, what we do, what our services are. Then we'll go through the webinar logistics. Then we'll learn a little about our presenter, today's presenter, Scott Ambler. And then we'll have Scott talking about Choose Your Wow, how Agile software teams can optimize their way of working. And post that, in case if you have any question during the session, you can post it in the question and answers chat box, which we would take forward after the session. So let me just take you through the introduction of innovation roots. So we are a leading training and consulting service providers and publisher of research-based content. And our motto is basically to create things of great value. And we provide solutions for futuristic organizations, as you see a couple of them listed here, like world-class agile transformation coaching, assessment, training, and consulting services. We have proven Scrum framework coaching and training for product development teams. We have a full range of Kanban courses and advisory for improving and optimizing workflow. Also, we have DevOps consulting training and transformation services. So here are the logistics for today's webinar. I request all of you to please use LAN cables for joining this webinar as Wi-Fi connections are unstable. Use high quality speakers or headphones for better sound quality, and I request all of you to keep your microphones on muted throughout the session. If you have any question, you can put it on the chat box, which we'll be taking after the session. So in case any questions are left during the session, we can get them answered after the webinar through email. So please be free to share your questions in the chat box. This webinar will be recorded. You can subscribe to YouTube channel of Innovation Roots to find the recording later. The slides of this webinar will also be available on Innovation Roots' SlideShare channel, so you can find it later at slideshare.net/InnoRoots. We appreciate your cooperation throughout the session. And let me just take you through the brief of Scott Ambler. Most of us know him. He's the chief scientist at Disciplined Agile INC. He works with organizations around the world to help them adopt agile and lean strategies across the enterprise. He's the co-creator of Disciplined Agile framework as well as the Agile modeling and Agile data. He's the co-author of several books, including Choose Your Wow, which is his recent book, and we are going to explore more around this today. An executive's guide to the Disciplined Agile framework, refactoring database, and Agile modeling are here to name a few. Now over to you, Scott.
Okay, thank you very much. If you could give me control. Oh, there we go. Okay, so here we go. Well, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy days to watch this, be involved with this webinar. So what I'd like to talk about is how do Agile software development teams optimize their way of working? How do they choose their wow? This is actually a fundamental concept from the beginning of Agile. For those of you who were here in the beginning in the early 2000s or even the late 90s, I would argue, a fundamental concept in the Agile community was that teams should own their own process, that they should choose their way of working. And this unfortunately fell to the wayside in the fairly early days of Agile, when we started seeing all these various certification schemes and these methods and frameworks started popping up. And people just started looking for easy answers, and then Agile sort of suffered for a long time from that. So, anyways, I'm going to hopefully bring us back to some of our roots because there is now a very clear belief in the community that we need to take back Agile. That we went off on a wrong path for a while, and we need to do something better. So, and I believe this is better. So, if you hear people talk about beyond Agile, I don't think we need to go beyond Agile. I think we got it fairly right at the beginning, and I think what happened is Agile went in a questionable direction for a while. Martin Fowler recently coined the term Agile Industrial Complex to explain some of these problems that he's been seeing as well over the years. So, anyways, as you heard, I've been around for a long time. I've been doing this Agile stuff from the very beginning, and I've done some of the similar work actually in the Agile community. So, anyways, let's get into this. So, I'm going to basically work through several major topics. So the first one is, what guided continuous improvement, and why should we be interested? What am I talking about when I say we need to go back to some of our roots? And then I'm going to talk about how to do it. How do we actually choose our wow as a team? So there's a lot of material being covered here. This is some of the fundamental concepts from the new book, Choose Your Wow. We've been blogging about this at the disciplineagiledelivery.com site. We will continue to blog about this over the next month or so, at least, to flesh out some more of the details for you. But anyways, let's jump in. So why guided continuous improvement? So, excuse me. So what we've been seeing in the marketplace is people, organizations, teams have been adopting frameworks. They adopt these methods, these frameworks like Scrum or Less or Safe, and they benefit from it. Without a doubt. We're seeing, at the beginning there's a little productivity dip, of course, because it takes time to learn. You got to get training and a little bit of coaching. But if things go well, then you improve, and your effectiveness gets better, and things are good. But eventually you level out, and this, I think, is the fundamental problem that we're seeing pretty much across the board in organizations. So you'll adopt this method, you'll adopt a framework, and then you basically hit its limits. Because every method, every framework addresses a certain space, a certain problem, and then once that problem has been addressed, then it doesn't really say much. And it's amazing, all these frameworks, all these methods basically cop out. And they take the same approach, and they say, well, you're really smart, you can figure it out. Well, yes, you are really smart. And yes, in theory, you could figure it out. But the problem is figuring it out takes deep experience, and figuring it out takes a lot of time and effort. And yes, you can do it. Without a doubt, you can do it. But it's very slow and very expensive. So these frameworks, these methods have limits, and we hit them constantly. So what happens is, why are these frameworks and methods so popular? Well, there's a lot of wild promises out there. So this is an example of a really good book that Jeff Sutherland wrote a few years ago now, called The Art of Doing Scrum, The Art of Doing twice the work in half the time, and it's a pretty good book. It's definitely worth reading. But look at the title. Here we have this promise of 4 times productivity. You can do twice as much in half the time. Well, that's 4 times productivity. So that's a wonderful promise, but what's the reality? So I'm a firm believer in something called empiricism, and a lot of the Scrum guys often talk about empiricism, but they could actually do with a little more effort around the empiricism effort. And what happens is, so let's be empirical. Let's look at the numbers. And well, the numbers, when we go to a actual researcher who is not biased and who is not trying to make money selling you Scrum or Safe or Less or Discipline Agile or other things, so he doesn't have skin in the game. Well, his research from as you can see, thousands of teams, is that on average we're seeing a 7 to 12% increase in productivity on these teams that adopt Agile, in particular Scrum, because as we know, Scrum is the most popular one, and that's good. Nothing to complain about there. But 7 to 12% is not 4 times. So we need to be a little more realistic. Now, when it comes to the scaling frameworks, we see, and in particular, as we know, Safe is the #1 scaling framework. And that's good for them. We're seeing slightly less productivity increases, around 3 to 5%. So also, nothing to complain about. That's okay. But certainly not probably what was being promised. I don't know exactly what the Safe Guys promised, but I have to think it's a little bit more than 3 to 5%. So, and this gets back to that original, curve I saw that showed you a few minutes ago with the red line curve, is that you hit the limits of the framework and method, and then you hit the limit. That's it. Yes, in theory, you could get better, but we also have to think that what is the quality of the coaches we've got? A lot of the Scrum coaches have a couple days of training, so there's a little bit of a limit there. The Safe Guys might have a little more training, but not much more usually, and so there's a limit there. So we often don't have the deep expertise that we need to help the teams go in a better direction and to actually improve. So let's look for examples out in the real world of teams that are doing better. And if you read any of the DevOps case studies, they pretty much are all the same. They take a lean approach around Kaizen, around continuous improvement. So instead of trying to adopt a framework or a method right out of the box and just cookie cutter your team into it and apply it directly, they instead take an experimental approach. They improve one step at a time. So what they do is a team will identify potential improvement. Like they'll say, hey, you know what? Why don't we try canary testing, or why don't we try test-driven development? Then they will they'll experiment with this new way of working to see if it works for them, because there are no best practices. Every team is different. Every team is in a unique situation. So even though that, their TDD is a great technique or canary testing is a great technique, it might not be a great technique for you. So you need to try that technique and see if it works for you in your situation. So you got to give it a try. And then at some point, a couple of weeks later, month or so later, depending on how long is appropriate, you assess the effectiveness of the technique to determine what worked well for you and what didn't. And usually what happens, there'll be some aspects of a technique that work very well. There'll be one or two things that don't work so well. So what I would suggest is you adopt the aspects of the new way of working that make sense, that worked well for you. The aspects of it, or maybe the entire thing, if none of it worked, abandon. Don't adopt it. So adopt the stuff that works, abandon the stuff that doesn't work. And if you're polite, you share your learnings with other teams. And that's usually a step that's missing in all these data loops that we hear about. But that's the idea. So what happens when we take this sort of approach is that sometimes the experiments are successful and we improve our way of working. Sometimes we have a failed experiment, so we give it a try and then we abandon it. We go back to the level that we were at. So we move forward and we improve in these steps. Sometimes we improve. Sometimes we have a failed experiment. We sort of stay level. So this is what happens. And also over time, as you can see, our effectiveness as a team improves. And this is a proven technique. Like I said, this is called Kaizen. The lean folks have been doing this for decades now. All of the DevOps case studies, at least all the ones I've read, are based on this idea, right? All these teams talk about how years ago they decided to get going, get better. They started trying new techniques, and over time they keep adopting, they keep getting better, and they get better and get better and get better. Now they're very effective, and they all know they need to continue getting better. So they've got this learning mindset. So at a high level, over the long term, this is what we see. So we take this continuous improvement approach, and we just over time we improve, get better. And this is, like I said, this is what we hear from all the DevOps folks. So how can we improve this? So where does Discipline Agile come in? So the challenge, excuse me, is with the very first step. So in the first step, we come up with a new way, a new potential improvement. So if we know what we're, so if we have a very good coach and a very experienced coach that, had a wide range of experience, then we can pretty much just go to the coach and say, hey, here's a situation. What do you think? Oh, well, I think we should try this. And then they'll go off and try it. Or if you're very good at researching the internet or researching the literature, maybe you could home in on a potential thing that will work. Fact is, most teams don't have very experienced coaches, and I'm sure that coaches, will tell you otherwise. But I get to go around the world. I've worked in hundreds of organizations, and I'm telling you now, I definitely run into great coaches, don't get me wrong, but I also run into far more coaches that, they're working on it. They're getting better over time, but they're not as experienced as I would hope. So, anyways, having said that, but like I said, there's great coaches out there. So we need to be able to identify these potential improvements. So our point with guided continuous improvement is that better decisions lead to better outcomes. So if you can identify techniques that are more likely to work, that are more likely to succeed when you experiment with them, you improve faster. So with guided continuous improvement, we see fewer failed experiments, or we see more successful experiments. So we have a steeper improvement curve. So, and that's what this diagram is showing. So what happens is, so I guess the question is how do we do this? Because yes, without a doubt, just hire, our very senior coach. So if you can, hire Kent Beck or Martin Fowler or, Dan North or, somebody like that, and you should be good to go. But assuming you can't afford to hire people like that, then what else do you do? And this is what we'll be talking about in a minute. And one thing I do want to point out is that, of course, if you find yourself in method hell, and this is a term from Ivar Jacobson, where you're stuck, you've adopted Scrum, you've adopted SAFe, whatever, often because, for whatever organizational concerns you have, if you're stuck and your improvement has plateaued because of that, you've hit the limits of the method, that's great. Now it's time to break out and actually sort of follow the advice, their own advice of, yes, figure it out on your own. Well, okay, fine. You don't have to be on your own. So you can, if you've leveled out with Scrum, or you leveled out with SAFe, okay, fine. Now let's kick into doing guided continuous improvement, and we can get better from there. So that's the fundamental idea here. So anyways, how do we do this is the question. So let's assume we can't hire, one of the top 5, one of the top 5% of coaches, because that's really what you need to do effective guided improvement is, a high level coach. So let's assume we can't do that. What else? What's our next best step? So our next best step is probably a pretty good coach with a toolkit in their hand, or a good team with a toolkit in their hand. And Discipline Agile is that toolkit. So the first step in doing all this is to initially tailor your approach. So find a technique that pretty much works for your situation. So and that might be Scrum, it might be Kanban, it might be SAFe or something, or less, or something like that. Might not be as complicated as SAFe, but anyway, so find it, get going. So tailor your initial wow. And a very important part of that, and I'll talk about that in a second, is to choose the appropriate life cycle, and then identify the initial practices you think that you need to follow. And one of the challenges that we find with a lot of the methods is that they're not complete. So, for example, Scrum is not complete, and they're very clear about this. So a lot of teams, they say they adopt Scrum plus XP. Well, yes, but when you actually look at those teams, what they've really done is they've adopted some aspects of Scrum and some aspects of XP, and they've probably adopted a few aspects of the unified process and not known it. They've probably adopted some, I guarantee they've adopted some aspects of Agile modeling and don't know about it, and so on. So they do sort of figure it out on their own, almost always from the whatever they heard about it in their training course. So and that's perfectly fine. So there's a little more to it than Scrum plus XP. So don't take that advice with a grain of salt. Okay, so anyways, so how do we do this? So a big step is to choose a life cycle. So in Discipline Agile, we support 6 life cycles. I'm gonna review them pretty quickly. So one is a Scrum-based Agile project life cycle. So this diagram, as you can see, is based on Scrum. It shows the common project phases. In Discipline Agile, we are very honest. We don't go through all these jump through all these semantic hoops that you see the Scrum people do. So instead of arguing about is there a sprint 0, and if so, how do you do it? It's blatantly obvious that Agile teams, Agile project teams at least, have some sort of a sprint 0, and we use grown-up terminology like inception or project initiation, stuff like that. So we're not afraid to admit that yes, there are phases in Agile. So we don't need to make up weird terminology like sprint zero or release sprints and stuff like that. We can just say, hey, you know what? There's different phases. There's these different flavors of time throughout a project, and let's do it. So we look at the bigger picture because we also understand that our teams are working in a larger organization, so they're being affected by the outside world. So it's not just about software development. We're also going to operate and support our system at some point. We have constraints coming in. We have organizational guidance and roadmaps. As you can see, we'll talk about this in a second. Along the bottom of this diagram, we see common lightweight milestones. So one of the things that many organizations struggle with is this idea of how do we allow teams to own their own process, to choose their wow when we have to govern them. So if I've got 40 or 50 teams in my organization or 500 teams in my organization, how do we allow them to actually do this and still function? So the management response is almost always, well, we're going to force every single team to work in the same way. And that is a fundamentally bad idea because different teams are in different situations. So what happens when you force the same process on teams? They just fake the process and they fight you on this constantly. And management often doesn't know this. And so there's all this wastage of teams faking the process as opposed to adding real value. So anyways, it is possible to allow teams to choose their own wow if you support common lightweight governance across the teams. So we built that right into Discipline Agile. So anyways, here's the Scrum-based Agile project lifecycle. This is a Kanban-based lean project lifecycle. So if your organization is still doing projects, then we have two lifecycles that support this for your basic Agile and lean teams. Notice how we've got the same governance across the same milestones across the bottom of the diagram. There's, of course, a lean continuous delivery lifecycle. So when you allow your teams to stay together, you take a product-based or a long-running team, a product team approach, and you get away from the overhead of projects. Then you see and of course you improve the process. You see this, construction focused continuous delivery lifecycle. Here's the same Agile delivery lifecycle. So we see, so some teams, so with the lean delivery lifecycle, we see teams releasing into production maybe several times a day, whereas with the Agile continuous delivery lifecycle, they're still doing this Scrum-based approach and maybe releasing to production at the end of every iteration, every sprint. So, and they've got short iterations, often like 1 week in length. So every Friday afternoon, they release something into production. This is a lean startup based exploratory lifecycle. So how do we run experiments to explore what our customer base might actually want in practice? So therefore we can reduce risk of bringing new features or new products to market. And of course, a large team, like a team of teams program lifecycle. So very similar to how less works or SAFe works for very large programs. So Discipline Agile has always supported tactical scaling like that. So we have an explicit life cycle now actually. So anyways, this is our so the point is there's 6 explicit life cycles supporting similar governance across the life cycles. So a team should pick the right life cycle that makes sense for them. Choose your own wow, choose your own way of working, including at the life cycle level. So as I was saying earlier, governance is baked right into Discipline Agile delivery. So we have this consistent lightweight governance across teams. So Discipline Agile is a hybrid. So when you hear this advice of, oh, we're doing Scrum plus XP, well, like I said earlier, you're doing Scrum plus XP plus some unified process, plus you're probably adopting some DevOps stuff and so on. Great, good for you. But what we do in Discipline Agile is we say, hey, you know what? There's great ideas from a wide range of sources, including the evil unified process or the evil traditional way of working. And anyway, so we say, hey, you know what? There's great ideas. There's all the great practices and strategies out there. So let's put them into context. Let's ask the question, instead of just saying, hey, this is a best practice and you should do this. let's actually, take it up a level and say, you know what? What are the trade-offs? What is this practice really all about? What are the trade-offs? What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? When should I use it? When should I not use this? To what extent should I do this practice? So this is what Discipline Agile does. This is why we call it a toolkit. So we put these strategies into context for you. So then that way you can make better process decisions. You can decide, hey, you know what? This is what this, instead of just saying, hey, TDD is really great, you should do this. We say, yeah, TDD is pretty good. If you do it, here's the advantages, here's the benefits you're going to see, but here's the disadvantages. So you're going to have to deal with that. So are you willing to accept this? And so you can make a better decision as to whether or not you should experiment with it, or whether or not you actually have a chance of doing TDD. Or being successful with TDD right now in the context of your team. So the challenge, of course, with that is that there's hundreds, if not thousands, of great practices out there. So if you've ever been to an Agile conference or a Lean conference, if you were to actually look at all the descriptions of these talks and to start adding up all of the techniques that people are talking about at any given conference, there'll be hundreds of techniques being discussed, hundreds, and that won't cover the full gambit. It'll be whatever people want to talk about at that particular conference. So we need to sort of step back and realize, hey, you know what? This software development stuff is pretty complex, and so this is what we do in Discipline Agile, and we hold up a mirror to software development, and we say, hey, you know what? Yes, software development is complex. We're not going to lie to you. We're not going to overly simplify it and tell you can learn it in 2 days of training and become a certified master, or all you got to do is read this 18-page body of knowledge and suddenly you'll be a certified master. Really, come on. Come on. So we hold up a mirror to what software development is all about, and we say, hey, you know what? Let's deal with this. Let's be honest about what's going on here. So what we do, so at a high level, we talk about process goals. What are the outcomes? What are the process outcomes that we need to achieve to be successful on an Agile team? So at some point we need to for example, at some point we need to put the team together and evolve the team. We need to we probably need to do release planning. What's our schedule? What's our projected cost, perhaps? And if not, you don't have to do that. Great, don't do it. Probably have to secure funding for this effort somehow. If we're smart, we prove the architecture works, we improve quality, so we refactor, we pay down technical debt, we accelerate value delivery, so we test and we produce a potential consumable solution, all good sort of stuff. Throughout a project, throughout an effort, we should be growing our team members. They should be getting training, coaching, and mentoring. We should be coordinating activities both within the team and with other teams. So in Discipline Agile, we recognize that my team is only one of many teams in the organization, and we should work effectively with them. So we're in, say, Scrum. They often talk about how the Scrum Master is supposed to protect you from the rest of the organization. I believe that's just a fundamentally stupid piece of advice. I have the rest of the organization around me. I need to work effectively with them. I need to actually work with them and get help from them and collaborate effectively with them. So I don't need anybody blocking me from the rest of the organization or blocking the rest of the organization from me. We need to figure out how to work together effectively. So this is what we want to focus on. How do we coordinate effectively between teams? How do we collaborate and work together? So there's a lot of great ideas here. So this is very high level. So it's all great, but I suppose you could call this a method. But there's not a lot of detail here. So how do we dive down the detail? So in behind each one of every those bubbles, those process goals, we have what's called a goal diagram. So for example, we have 3 different goals: exploring team, or exploring scope, forming the team. For each of these goals, each of these process goals, there's 2 or more decision points. Things you need to think about. So when we're putting a team together, or when we're evolving an existing team, we got to ask ourselves the basic questions, like, where are these people coming from? What's the source? How big is the team going to be? What type of structure? How are we going to structure this team? How complete is the team? Do we have all the skills we need, or are we just a testing team, for example? Are we geographically distributed, and if so, how? Do we have time zone distribution, or people in different parts of the world? How are we going to support the team? How available are team members? 100%? Are they part-time? Combinations thereof. So there's a bunch of issues, bunch of decision points that we need to think through. And we will think through them either implicitly or explicitly. And our advice is think about them explicitly. Make these, because you are making these process decisions, do so intelligently, because better decisions lead to better outcomes. So in behind each and every one of these decision points, there's choices. You have options. Now, we're not saying we've identified all possible options, but we have identified enough to get you going, to let you know that you've got choices. So unlike the frameworks and the methods that pretty much tell you, here's the one official way, here's the one best practice that you need to do, we instead saying, you know what, here's what you need to think about. Here are your choices. You choose intelligently. You choose your own wow. You own your own process. You make good choices for you in your situation because you are a unique team in a unique situation. So you need to figure it out, and we can help you figure it out. We can help guide you through these choices that you are making and that you will make. So here we see that when it comes to geographic distribution, there's several different ways we can go, or combinations thereof. There's an arrow beside this list that indicates, excuse me, that indicates that it's an ordered list, which means that the strategies towards the top of the list are generally more effective than the strategies towards the bottom list. So also, instead of telling you, here's the one and only best practice, we also say, here's a bunch of options. Sometimes some of them are better than others, but you do the best you can in the situation that you face. So even though having a co-located team is generally more effective than these other strategies, if the best you can do is to have distributed sub-teams, well, then that's the best that you can do right now. So do the best you can. Know that there's better options. So over time, try to get better, try to improve. But at all points in time, do the best that you can right now. We also see that we suggest defaults, and these defaults basically boil down to, our for a team. So if you're a small team that's reasonably near located, taking on a fairly straightforward problem, then the default options, the suggested options, are probably the choices for you, because some people don't want to make choices. They just want to be told what to do. Okay, fine, we'll tell you what to do. But if that's not your situation, then you're going to have to start thinking. So, and you're going to have to make choices for yourself. So sometimes there's suggestions, and sometimes they might work for you. And then, of course, in behind all these options are trade-offs. No such thing as a best practice. Every practice, every strategy has advantages and disadvantages. It makes sense in some situations, and it's a spectacularly bad idea in others. I have never, ever run into a practice that made sense in all situations, ever. I've never, ever. I run into lots of people who will tell me, oh, this is the greatest thing, this is the best way of working. And then with the creator of the practice, and then as soon as I start asking, well, wait a minute, tell me where it doesn't work, tell me what the disadvantages are. Sometimes they're reticent to do that, but there's even like the creators of the practices will tell you, oh yes, blah blah blah. Here's what the challenges are. Okay, fine. Let's be very clear about that. Let's help people understand these things. So, anyways, this is an example of a goal diagram. This is fairly big, but here we have forming, the form team process goal diagram. So we see, here's the goal for a team. Here's the decision points. And then here are the options. Now, in behind all of these options, as I said, are the trade-offs. This is why we now have this book, which is about 400 pages. So it's fairly big. But when you start listing all these trade-offs, then it's big. Is what it is, and it's all bullet points. So it's easy to read, but still there's a lot to it. So, anyways, what we want to do is help you understand, here's the problems that you're facing, here are the challenges, here are your options, choose accordingly. Now, around this point, people start getting a little bit worried. They say, oh, this is so confusing, this is so hard. Why do you have to make it so hard, Scott? I don't make it hard. Sorry. Like I said, all we do is hold up a mirror to the complexity that we face. And so, what happens is when people start saying, well, this is so complex, my only response is, okay, fine, what would you take away? And so of those decision points, when you have to form a team, what would you take away? Now, sometimes everybody say, well, you know what? We don't have to worry about geographic distribution because we're co-located. Okay, fine. Somebody else dealt with that for you and said, boom, you've got to be co-located. And okay, lucky you. That's the best option. But that was dealt with. It just, so the decision might not be in your hands. Okay, fine. It was made for you, but somebody else made it. Hopefully they made it intelligently. They did the best they can for you. So anyways, so when you see these diagrams, instead of getting overwhelmed, and to be honest, this is one of the bigger ones, but when you start seeing these diagrams, if it seems a little overwhelming, fine, but step back and ask yourself, okay, what would I remove? And I suspect you'll find nothing, because this is the test that we always put against these diagrams, and it's got to get past us. So we are very good at culling these diagrams. So anyways, here's a simpler one. This is the secure funding goal. Excuse me. The secure funding process goal. So there's different ways to fund teams, fund projects. This is often interesting to a lot of organizations, particularly the managers, because the way you fund a team has a huge impact on their productivity. If you choose the wrong funding approach, and most particularly organizations still struggling with traditional, will almost always inject a phenomenal amount of risk in their teams by choosing fixed price or even stage gate funding, and not know it, and they will honestly believe that those are low risk ways of working, whereas they're actually the highest risk and least effective ways of funding. So this is another benefit of the toolkit, is that you can start having intelligent discussions about the options. And first of all, you can let people know there are options. Very often they don't realize that, and they very often don't realize the trade-offs that they're making. So now we can have intelligent discussions around process stuff. Here's changing stakeholder needs. So there's a little more to it than having a backlog. But anyway, and having a backlog is one of many options in there. But once again, you've got choices. Make the choices that are appropriate for you. And the methods, what they do, all the methods are so Scrum is an instance of Discipline Agile. We can pick off all the Scrum, very very easily pick off the Scrum options that they inflict on you, that the decisions they made for you. Whereas in Discipline Agile, you know what, you should make your own decisions because you're grown-ups and you can do that. And here's a little bit of help doing it. So over time. So that was about initial tailoring. Over time, though, these particularly these goal diagrams can be helpful in retrospectives, because when you're in a retrospective and you identify some problems, well, that's great. You've identified, we're struggling with quality. Okay, great. But what are the options to address quality? So you can go to the toolkit, you can go to the book, and you can look it up and say, hey, you know what? Here's like 4 options we haven't tried. Hey, let's try this. This sounds like it's going to work for us. So let's experiment with that and see if it actually helps us. And then of course with the experiments is that, give it a try, because once again, no such thing as a best practice. So the real question here is, will this strategy work for you in your situation? And the only way you can figure that out is to give it a good try. And that's why an experimental approach is critical in these continuous improvement strategies. So, and of course, over time, regardless of the life cycle you picked, you'll evolve away from it. So you might start with the Agile Scrum-based life cycle or the Lean-based life cycle, but then over time, you make process improvements, you improve your wow, and you start moving towards these other life cycles. So you might adopt the Scrum-based Agile life cycle right now because that's the best you can do in your situation. But then you start learning and you start moving away from that life cycle. Maybe you evolve into the Agile continuous delivery life cycle, and then you get good at that and sort of stabilize for a bit, and then eventually you evolve into the continuous delivery lean life cycle, which is typically what what all these DevOps teams are doing now. But their stories are all the same. It took them years to evolve into that. You don't just generally don't just start there. So anyways, expect the life cycles to evolve is what I'm saying. So just to wrap up before we go to questions, context counts. Every team is unique. You face unique situation. I said that multiple times. You must be allowed and must be enabled to choose your way, to choose your way of working. And having choice is good. So yes, it's overwhelming being shown, here's the complexity of software development, here are your choices, choose accordingly. But you know what? That complexity exists, like it or not. My advice would be to embrace this complexity, because that is inherently what you're dealing with. So embrace the situation that you're in and then deal with it. Learn to cope. And be pragmatic. It's not about being agile. It's not about, we're going to get a little gold star for being safe compliant or Scrum compliant or whatever. It's all about being effective, and better yet, about learning and about experimenting, and do the best you can, but let's try to get better at all points in time. Let's have this learning mindset. And this is exactly what the DevOps people tell you. This is what all the case studies are all about. Let's make these small improvements. Take this Kaizen-based approach, make these small improvements over time, and this is the way we improve our effectiveness as a team. We need to be allowed to choose our wow. So I'll give you a minute or so to start, putting questions in the chat window. Myself and my business partner, Mark Lyons, my co-author and co-developer of the Discipline Agile framework, we're going to be in Bangalore in the middle of March for the Agile India conference. So if you're going to that, great. We're giving a couple of presentations. We're going to do a local meetup and a couple workshops. And we've still got some time to do other workshops. So feel free to reach out to us if you would like to bring us into your organization, because we'd love to do that. And all this information is on the Discipline Agile Consortium.org site for some of the great stuff we're going to be doing in Bangalore. Anyways, let's go to the questions, and we'll start saying, I guess I'll just start looking. Oh, wow, lots. Okay, so we won't get through all of these. That's okay. So we will, like we heard, we'll respond by email. I'll probably blog about this or something. Okay. What messages? That's good. Timeline. Watching.
Scott, there's one question about the book you mentioned there during your presentation.
Yes. The name of the book is Choose Your Wow. Yeah. I won't go back to the title slide. Yeah, it's not there. Oh, there it is. Yeah. So there's the cover of the book right there. So yeah, Choose Your Wow. Same title as the presentation. Okay. Somebody said, hey, Discipline Agile is making more sense now. Hey, great. Thanks. Good to hear that. From John Trilly. Here's a great question. Question about whether teams really top out at 12%. Yeah, that's an average. So this is, I'm not going to go back to this slide, but if you Google Don Reifer, I might not spell this right, R-E-I-F-E-R. Don's a researcher. He actually earned his PhD researching the effectiveness of Agile teams, and he publishes. He's actually very generous, and he's published his results for years, and I believe he sells his research results, but he also publishes articles, and he writes for InfoQ and other sources. So, but yeah, if you go poke, if you do a quick search for Don Reifer, you'll get access to this data. But the idea, yeah. So this is an average. So what he's found across 3,000 teams. So this is in multiple organizations. I think it's like 150 or 200 some odd organizations he's looked at, and he actually gets to go in and in many of these organizations and interview the teams, research, and I think he makes a bit of a living charging organizations to go in and assess them and do this research, and then he sells the research results. So smart guy. But anyways, yeah. So those stats were from his studies, and what I like about his studies is, well, first of all, the man's got a PhD. Like this is he lives for this. Like this is he years figuring this out and earned a PhD on how to study Agile. So he's one of the few independent sources of data on this. I would argue I am too, but I'm obviously biased because it's me. But yeah, I was sort of shocked as well. His stats of 7 to 12%. But anyways, so yeah, so this is on average, right? So and they tend to peak out because if you get to observe teams, like I've got this advantage. I get to go to organizations, like dozens of organizations a year around the world, And then I get to see, dozens, sometimes hundreds of teams within these organizations. And then they're all struggling. Well, not all, but a lot of them are struggling with, and they have topped out. They've hit the limit, and sometimes it's the limit of the people involved. They just don't have the process background, and they also don't even have the language now, because the Scrum guys created their own language to describe what they're doing. They have sprints, and other people invent this language. They do mapping, and they purposely avoid other older terminology like iterations and modeling and stuff like that. So people can struggle to find these practices and strategies online if they even know to go look. So there's what's the probability somebody's going to go look for help? It's fairly low, actually. Then what's the probability that they're going to have the language to actually go and find the information? Even lower. But anyways, so it's pretty shocking that it's 7-12%. But okay, from James, how can we make Discipline Agile work with service domain organizations like in India? Why? Oh, somebody typed in Don Reifer. Great. Yes. So how could you not? So there's nothing special about the situation that you're in India, and I work in India, right? And as you know, I'm coming there in March. But you've got to be allowed. You've got to be allowed to and enabled to choose the way you work. Now, sometimes if you are a service organization, you're often have a contract inflicted upon you. Well, you 100% of the time you do, and sometimes those contracts will define the way you need to work, but they never go into the detailed minutia of how you want to work, if they even talk about how you're going to work at all. So yeah, you've got control of that. You can decide as a team how you work. You can decide as an individual how you choose to learn and what you choose to experiment with. There's nothing wrong with it. You might have a few constraints on your contract. You have to work in two sprints or something, but yeah, you pretty much have complete control if your management allows it, right? So it's not, so it'll be, it gets back to the same old issue that the Americans, the Europeans have. I'm from Canada, by the way, but if you're a team in, say, Germany, does your management enable you to choose your own WOW? Are you in it? So it's like I can insert any country there or any organization name in that question, and it's the same question, right? Are you allowed to do it? And so are you trusted by your management to do that? Have you earned their trust? Might be another way to look at that. So that would be my answer on that one. Okay, so from Vikram, can you please mention the author name? Okay, Don Reifer. From James again, the contracts are mostly everything fixed. So yes, so okay, so you've got some so let's go through this. And yeah, I work in that environment too. So on both sides, by the way, I work on the customer side of things. I work on the service provider side of things. And frankly, my company is in many ways is a form of a service provider. Not like TCS or Cognizant, but still, we work with these other companies too, and we provide services to them. So anyways, yeah, so you're constrained. So unfortunately, the budget's constrained, the budget's been fixed and the time has been fixed. Spectacularly bad decisions on the part of the customer. So I'm constantly working with customer organizations to stop doing that. But whatever your situation is right now on the ground is the situation. So do the best you can. Also, what you can do, and this is what I do, is I work with the contractor and with the procurement people and with the people who are signing these contracts and helping them understand the implications of that and to help them give options. So one of the reasons why these contracts are so messed up is the procurement people don't understand the implications of what they're asking for, because they've been told what to do and they're doing it, and they believe that they're doing well. They're not evil people doing it on purpose, but they believe that what they're doing is effective, and it's not. So we help them. My organization will go in and help them and and help them, give them better options, and help them to experiment. So, and frankly, because we can go in, I was actually at a bank just a while ago and having an argument with some of the, not but a harsh discussion with some of the procurement people around, well, here's the effectiveness of how you're procuring things. And the guy says, and eventually they admitted, yeah, we understand that. We just don't know how we can get the Indian service providers to work better. Well, have you had this conversation with them? No. So you gotta have these conversations, right? So anyways, so at the team level, yeah, you're constrained by the contract and you got to live with it, but the contracts still don't go into all the details. So you can work within those constraints. But I would also start pushing back into management and say, hey, you know what? For the people signing the contracts, maybe you can work with the customer organization to get better. And because on my end, we are working with the customer organizations, helping them. And if you can help with the service providers, well, maybe things will get better. Okay, so we're completely at the mercy of management if they allow us to do anything on our own. Yes, you are. So help get management educated. Help them, because this isn't just about software developers. This is about managers as well. And some of the some of the challenges that I see in Agile is this anti-management mindset. Well, if you're constantly beating up on management, if you're constantly picking a fight with them, why would they respect you? Yeah, I think that's a harsh observation. Why would they respect you? So, and they don't. So we got to work effective management. There is a role for management in Agile. We have to help them find it. We have to help them become more effective. Otherwise, we will be in the situation that we're in. Okay, I get okay. Okay, so hard to see. Okay, we need to brainwash procurement. No, we need to educate the procurement people. And they're good people. It's easy to beat up on them, but they're good people in a complex situation, and they're constrained as well, right? They're not, they are not evil. Well, maybe one or two of them are, but they're not evil. They're doing the best they can. They just might not. They often don't understand the implications of what they're asking for. Or they're just so overwhelmed like everybody else. They're just not enough people. So they're just so overwhelmed that they're trying to inflict standard processes, standard procedures on everybody in order to survive. So we have to help them get better. And we have to help them experiment. So they should be experimenting. Now, one of the things I didn't talk about in this in the presentation is the overall Discipline Agile framework. Procurement is one of the process areas. So just, I've been focusing on Discipline Agile delivery, the bottom quarter of the framework, but procurement is at the enterprise level, and there's choices. There's decision points you got to make. There's choices that procurement people can make in order to be better. So just like Discipline Agile can help software development teams, it can also help procurement teams. Okay. Oh, not everybody can be like me, but I keep learning. You know what? Everybody can be. Yes, I'm spectacularly good looking, and I'm just an awesome person. But yeah, you can. You can choose to try, and you can choose to learn, and choose to have conversations. Right? It's and there's a skill, and sometimes the conversations go very well, sometimes they won't. But you can choose to have conversation with people. And I think this is one of the things about the framework is that you can start having intelligent conversations. And I think that the challenge that developers have is they have very strong opinions about things, whether they know anything about that topic or not. So they'll have very strong opinions about management, and they'll have very strong opinions about procurement. Let's continue to pick on procurement. They'll have very strong opinions about the way procurement should work or the way finance should work, but they don't understand finance. They don't understand procurement. They don't, So if I got to be able to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes before I understand them. Before I can have an intelligent conversation with them. So and this is the problem. And so what happens is if you just say, well, we can't do fixed prices because it's evil. The finance people will say, yeah, shut up. It's like talking to a 3-year-old. Yeah, you want candy. Go away. this is the problem. So if you want to have an intelligent conversation with finance people, you got to know what the finance is all about, and you have to you got to be able to give them options and speak coherently about those options. And I'm not saying you got to go back to university and get a finance degree, but certainly you should spend a little bit of time understanding what finance people do. Maybe ask them, having hunt down a finance person, have an informational interview with them, and get them to explain the challenges that they face and why they do what they do, and help them to understand. And then, once you understand what they're dealing with, you've got a better chance of helping to communicate, well, here's what we're dealing with. So when you ask us for fixed price and fixed schedule, that sounds like a good idea, but this is the phenomenally bad behavior you're going to get out of the software development team when you do that. So by asking for fixed price and fixed schedule, you've actually dramatically increased the risk of this project. Did you realize that? You have not decreased the risk. You've increased the risk. And so something bad is going to happen here. More than likely, we'll cut quality and still get more money out of you anyways. But, stuff happens. Okay, so anyways, I was babbling. There's a lot of questions here. Okay. Another question from James. Here's a new requirement for somebody who's Agile, goes to, and so on. Is it all right to ask this from a single person? My answer is hell yes. I think, I was the person that came up with the idea of I coined the term generalizing specialist. Now, I don't expect, if you're fresh from school, I don't expect to be an expert at everything. That's just naive. But you know what? If you've been if you expect to be in this industry for 30 or 40 years, I expect you to get experience in all these sorts of things. Why not? Right? There's this old adage that, somebody with 20 years experience, do they have 20 years of experience, or is it 1 year of experience 20 times over? So when you're a specialist, when all you want to do is be a programmer, or all you want to do is be a tester, or all you want to be is a designer, that's great. But now after 20 years of that, you've got 1 year of experience 20 times over. So I expect people to, if you want to be effective, you need to branch out, and you need to, you need to at least dabble in DevOps, and dabble in testing, and dabble in coding, and dabble in architecture, and this and this and this, and broaden your skills. Now you'll find some specialties that you love. You might love UX design and be very good at that. But you can still do these other things. You might love programming, be very good at that, but you can still do these other things and be willing to learn those skills. So over your long-term career, the answer is hell yes. In the short term, fresh out of school, then fine. You got the 1 or 2 skills you got in school, and that's about it. So, but that's a good base to start from. So, recognize that it's a good base and then work from there. But you don't become a certified master in 2 days. So, we've got to start respecting ourselves, I think, and realizing it's hard. Okay, a lot of days there's buzz going around about business agility involving HR, marketing, and so on. Organizations are trying to move towards business agility, but and I think these other groups like HR and marketing are a little more mature than what we see in the IT world. But the question becomes, how does it all fit together? This is what Discipline Agile addresses, actually, if you look at the framework itself or the toolkit itself. But this is a hard problem to solve. So Agile HR, Agile marketing, Agile procurement, those are all hard problems all by themselves. But the issue becomes your organization is a complex adaptive system. All of these teams are working together, and they need to work together effectively because they have an effect on each other. So you need the bigger picture. And Discipline Agile is the only source of that right now. And the big picture, if you think the software development stuff I was showing you, if you think that's complex, you need to look at the enterprise picture. It's crazy complex, and that's the reality that we face. And this is why people go to school for years for HR or marketing and stuff like that, right? So you start adding up all of these domains, which is what you need to do for business agility. You get a heck of a lot of stuff, and this is the reality we face. So very quickly, how does Discipline Agile tackle HR department and policy? Yes, we do. It's called the people management process blade, because I don't believe that humans are resources. So we can get that bias right out of the description. So yes, there is something specific. It's called people management. From chaos, wow, agile coach, DevOps, and just Scrum Master, mindset of resource utilization. Not sure what the question is there, so and I will skip it. Okay, John Shirley, yes, branching out, not an expert in everything. Yeah, but so the idea with a generalizing specialist is you're an expert in at least one thing, because you got to be useful. You got to add some real value, right? But if you also have broader knowledge of the overall thing that we're trying to accomplish, in this case, software development, then you can interact effectively with others. You can learn, and they can learn from you, and you can start making better decisions. Because the problem with specialists is they do their job, whether you need them to do their job. So if you've got somebody who all they can do is be a scrum master, then they'll be a scrum master all day long. Do I need somebody being a scrum master full time? Probably not. But if that's the only thing they can do, then they're going to do it. And they're going to sit there and they're going to twiddle their thumbs. This is the challenge I find with a lot of project managers. All they can do is be a project manager. And what happens when there's not 8 hours a day of project management work, they start meddling with the rest of the team. They get in the way and they start creating busy work. Yeah. So, okay, not sure what's going on with the burnout stuff. So yeah, people get burned out. Yeah, for many reasons. Anyways, we're running out of time, so I'll wrap this up. Got through all the questions. So thank you very much. Don't be shy. Feel free to reach out to me if you have other questions.
So thank you, Scott. Thank you for being there and sharing your insights with all of us. It's been a wonderful session. And I would like to thank all the participants as well to take out time from their busy days. And I hope it has been an informative and worthwhile session for all of you. I would like all of you to inform that the uh, webinar has been recorded and it would be available in a week's time over Innovation Roots' YouTube channel, and the slides will be available at the SlideShare channel. I would again like to thank all of you for being part of this session. Thank you so much, everyone.